Hello and welcome. This is episode 25 of a podcast Engineer to Manager. I'm your host, Oleks Maistrenko. In this podcast, we are diving into the essence of engineering management. We explore what engineering management is, what are the challenges and opportunities. For this journey, I invite experienced managers from different parts of the world. Today's guest is Ben Parisot. Hello, Ben. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
Good. Thanks for asking. Nice to have you here on this podcast. You are now a software engineering manager at Planet Argonne. You are working with a team level and with individual contributors. On the team level, you help to improve process, productivity, and boost the morale. And on the individual level, you work with individual developers to set their career path. And in your spare time, and I really admire that, you have a hands-on on code still, being a manager, working as a JavaScript developer, both for front-end, back-end, and you're also a strong advocate for LGBTQ plus representation in tech. Nice to have you. Is everything correct?
That's very correct. Yes, thank you.
Oh, nice. Dear listeners, before we continue this conversation, please subscribe to the channel and don't forget to react to the video. It's important to understand whether it's interesting for you or not. If not, then let us know in the comments. If yes, I guess you'll have some questions for Ben after listening to this, and I will kindly ask Ben to go in the comments and reply to your inquiries. Is that fine with you, Ben?
Happy to do it.
Oh, absolutely nice. So back to you. Let's talk about you and your career a little bit. You started some time ago, your career, and you started not in tech. And then you joined the tech industry. What has been the motivation for you to join the tech industry?
Sure. Yeah, you're correct. I have a bit of a non-traditional background into tech. I went to school for writing and communication. I had an English degree and focused on journalism and a little bit on technical writing in the few years after that. To be perfectly blunt, newspaper jobs were drying up as soon as I graduated from college. There weren't a lot of writing gigs going around. And so I sort of pivoted into a type of writing that I was equally good at and that there were a lot more opportunities for, which was technical writing. And so I joined as a content creator and writer for an SEO company and did a lot of technical documentation and sort of marketing copy for companies through like varied different types of companies. I eventually went into more technical producer and project manager roles. After that, spent a number of years managing projects, managing teams of developers, mostly contract developers, managing developer works, client stakeholders, that sort of thing. And over time, got more involved into the development process and was like, I think I might want to also participate in this part of it as well. So I got into contribution around 2017 is when I started to dip my toes into it. And then went sort of full-time IC in 2019. And then went back into management as a engineering manager in late 2020 with this position at Planet Argonne.
Nice. So you basically gradually joined the tech, if I could say that way.
Yeah, I waded slowly into the water of tech instead of just diving right in, but it worked out for me.
When you join a new industry, tech industry or non-tech industry, you have to learn the vocabulary. Mm-hmm. And there is a number of terms and there are things that you have to learn. And coming from a non-technical background, what has been important for you to learn first, like the concepts, the vocabulary, start doing your one-on-one programming? What has been crucial for you?
That's a great question. I would say that when I first started getting into tech, especially as a writer, I would focus on, it's hard. Like I needed to use the correct terminology. But if I was writing about a certain, term in any sort of context, I would also need to know what that term meant so that I could write intelligently about it. Mm-hmm. So I would say that like moving into tech, gradually increasing my like knowledge and skill sets over years. When I was younger, I might have been more inclined to throw out terms that I didn't fully understand, as we all do sometimes. But really, where I found that I succeeded was when I would be talking about something that I fully understood, even if I didn't know that there was like an industry term for it. I remember years ago having conversations like at meetups or even in an interview and talking about something, and the person would be like, "Oh, you mean this?" And I did. I just didn't know that there was a specific term for it because I didn't have that like structured education around my technical skills. But it definitely, the understanding of terms and the language that you're using is more important than just being able to like throw stuff out, I think.
Yeah, so no clickbait like, okay, let's deploy AI on Kubernetes.
Exactly.
Don't know what that means, but it sounds like, well, very nicely accepted by the community. Let's do it, mate.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's so basically, as a writer, you were establishing your context in whatever field you were working, and then you basically had the skill of getting the context and their understanding of the whole scenery, so to say, and they're putting the pieces of the puzzle together.
Yeah.
That's interesting habit or skill that you have, and I think that would also make sense for everyone to have or adopt. As their context is so broad, and it's very important to kind of dive into it. One thing that you mentioned, that you basically became from the writer to developer, and then you went to their management. You said back management job. Why back? What do you mean by that?
Sure. So it was both sort of an evolution of my management career as well as a return to a style of management. So before I became an IC full time, I was doing more technical project management, as I said, as well as I had a role as technical producer, which was like part Scrum Master, part team manager. So I had to parts of a successful EM's role throughout and spread out across a number of different roles. While I say I moved back into management, it was more like moving from IC and taking the skills that I had acquired in previous roles and combining them into an engineering team manager position. There's lots of obvious reasons. One is there's an implied path from IC to manager that is hard to resist. So I think that when you are working full time as an independent contributor, and the opportunity to move into management comes up, at least for myself, I thought that was very alluring, and it would combine some of my previously held skill sets from different jobs, as well as my IC skills that I had been honing for the few years before that.
Lots of people say that going from IC to EM is not a promotion. And I tend to agree with that, because basically it's a very different role. It's a very different career path. And with IC, you can grow more into the core business and taking more responsibility across the company. It all depends, of course, on the size of the project where you're working. Of course, if it's like 2 or 3 person project, you will be IC forever. But
Right.
if it's like a company of 100 plus people, then you can go into a more senior IC role and take their understanding of the project across different teams, right? Therefore, going from IC to EM is kind of changing their direction, and there is a good article online about IC and EM pendulum. When people go back and forth, and here with your example, we see manager, IC, manager. Maybe next time you go back to IC role.
Yeah, I really like the pendulum analogy. Actually, that makes a lot of sense to me. I've heard the analogy of a fork in the road, which I feel makes sense at first glance, but then when you think about it, it's Well, no, a lot of people switch back and forth depending on the company, like you said, the company size, the nature of the work. Someone might be really love their team and want to like manage that team because of the people on it and the nature of the work. Some people might really want to pursue diving deeper into the product that they're building and becoming the domain expert on that. But that doesn't mean that they're stuck on that one path. So
Right.
that pendulum analogy really hits home.
What do you like more, IC role or EM role?
That's a trick question. I think I
Let's
don't.
say, what do you like more now, right? Because your opinion might change in the future.
Sure. I honestly don't have. I can't say that I like one over the other. I mean, like, I love tacos and I love pizza. And I don't think that I could choose one or the other because they both have like pros and cons. I would say, obviously, that my role right now is management. And so I am much more in the thick of management work. So I'm probably tend to say that now more, but that's only because I'm doing it every day. I feel sharp. I feel practiced in it. And while I am contributing on some side projects, it's like not my main gig. And so, but on the other hand, like there's always the grass is always greener phenomenon, right? Where I'm like, oh,
True.
there's certain days where I'm like, I really miss being a IC. Like this manager gig is like so much, and it would be really nice to just focus on one thing all the time. So maybe it just depends on my mood for the day or how well work is going for that day or that week. But I would say, I guess my skill sets and my ability to like communicate and empathize with people probably lends me better to management roles because there's a lot more of those types of skills involved, or can be.
There is one difference also between IC and AM is your relation, or how do you like the meetings. So if you're a manager, meetings are a part of your work, right? And if you hate them, then you're probably in their IC mode right now and saying like, okay, I don't want any of those meetings today. Next week, no. But then you say, oh, well, I had a very productive meeting. Let's have another one to achieve something. So it's kind of maybe influenced by the meeting type you had today or yesterday.
Right. I agree with you to an extent. I have a philosophy that everybody hates bad meetings, and that's not like a super hot new take or anything. But I think that meetings poorly run for no clear purpose, it doesn't matter whether you're a manager or an IC, like that's a waste of your time and nobody wants those on their calendar. I think that for ICs, it's more likely to feel like this is taking me away from the work that I'm being paid to do, which is build something. IC meetings always should involve some sort of like contribution to the work that's being done. Whereas management, you can have, it's more okay to like have your work be meetings, facilitating those conversations and setting people up for success in their work. Yeah, I think that, real ICs that are like, no, just put me heads down. I don't want to ever talk to anyone. Like that's one thing, but it's also, there are good productive meetings that involve ICs or can even be led by ICs. Pairing is a meeting, if you think about it, and that's just, coding with someone else. So
it's actually a part of their EM's job and responsibility to set up those meetings correctly.
Correct.
And specifically for some meetings, making sure that they are understood by ICs why the meetings are there and what is the goal, like one-to-one, right? One-to-one on one-to-one, IC doesn't produce any code, zero code output, but it's important to share the goal and make a clear expectation that this is a time for IC where the person can bring the problems to the table, to the discussion, and share basically what's not working and where he or she requires a help, right?
Yeah, that's correct. I think that one-on-one specifically can feel like a lot of wasted time. I've certainly been in one-on-ones where I'm like, neither of us really want to be doing this or know why that we're here. It's just, part of our schedule. And that's both manager and person being managed. So I think that, like you said, the why is really important. That's key across any type of meetings, but specifically for one-on-ones. I often will, I create an agenda for every meeting that I host, and one-on-ones are no exception. If I don't have anything on my agenda or I don't have anything to talk about, then I will often let the person know at the beginning, be like, hey, there's nothing that I need to cover today. Give space for them to bring anything up that they want to talk about. And if there's nothing really to go over, then we can just end that meeting early. Like, we don't need to force a conversation just because it's on the calendar. But oftentimes there's, something on someone's mind.
No.
And so we can dive into that more.
Makes sense. Ben, if we're talking about the skills of EM, right? What would be the 3 top skills for engineering manager that are the most important skills from your point of view?
Mm-hmm. I almost said communication. That was going to be my first one. But I think that's not entirely correct. I think the language of leadership is a more accurate way of describing it. I think that there's a distinction there. You have to know how and when to communicate with people on your team so that they feel supported and safe and valued. And that involves using the right types of language. There can be engineering, leaders, managers that are very good at communication, but they don't have the right language. And so they are, at best, enforcing, these sort of industrial age hierarchies to drive their teams towards productivity, and at worst, ostracizing their team and making them feel like they are just a cog in the wheel. So I think that knowing how to talk to people, knowing the right language to use, adjusting that for individual types of people, and not just having some blanket approach, that's a crucial skill. I would also say empathy. Everybody says empathy, but there's a reason for that. It's hard to manage a team successfully if you aren't empathetic to their needs or their experiences. On the flip side of that, it's also hard to manage a team for a long period of time without gaining empathy for them. So I say, if you're an engineering manager and you don't feel empathy towards your team and you've been managing them for years, that's something to look into. But I think that, empathy isn't also just feelings. It's also it's important to standardize it across your team. Having standardized processes and ceremonies that enforce empathy or encourage it, I suppose. That can be done in how you structure your one-on-ones, how your team structures their code reviews and pair programming sessions, how you run all hands meetings. There's a bunch of different ways that you can do that. But empathy really needs to be systemic in your organization. And, that's done through correct management processes.
Right.
I also would say the third one probably is trend analysis. And this is not my most fully formed opinion of what the best things, but I do feel strongly about it. I think that, there's ways of tracking or observing developer, team member, doesn't even need to be devs, behavior that can act as a way to support productive work, but also as a way to be a canary in the coal mine, I guess. It's important to spot patterns in your team's behavior and recognize when they are deviating from those patterns, that it might be a warning to you that there's an issue that you haven't addressed or that hasn't been spoken about, and that you need to address it before stuff hits the fan.
Well, it might not be an issue. It might be a change of their team dynamics for some reason. And this is indeed very important to catch until it goes uncontrolled. And it might be a positive change. It might be a negative change. It all depends. But kind of their grip on the situation is basically that's what you need. And that grip is based on the numbers, data.
Correct. Yeah. I would say that, a lot of people think of trend analysis as like productivity metrics or even, developer experience metrics. But there's also some things that you can just sort of get a vibe for when you're watching, like Slack participation, or if you're not fully remote, like meeting participation, or stand-up attendance, that sort of thing. Like if there are things that a developer used to be super into doing, and was perfectly willing to do, and then that changes, there's probably a good reason for that. I was thinking about this, trying to come up with a good example. And I think commit messages are an interesting one, because you can
Oh.
have a standard across your company of like how commit messages should be written, the information that needs to be included, that sort of thing. And people can follow that for the sake of following it, just to keep the
Hmm.
team productive and well informed. But I think there's also something underlying a commit message that speaks to like a developer's excitement about the work, how they feel about their workload. If you're seeing someone who went from following your standard, very, descriptive commit messages to very like, terse, short, bare
Yeah,
bone
kind of
messages.
message number 24. I've
Exactly.
been working on the issue. Full stop. That's it.
Exactly. Like that might, point to something that's like a huge issue that's actually not being surfaced. That could be like that developer feels overworked, or that developer isn't practicing like best practices, and they are like building everything up to like one giant commit that they can't describe in like a single message. Maybe they are very bored by their work, like it's not exciting them, and so why would they like have the
Yeah,
energy?
but it might be that they're just tired.
And it can also just be they're tired. Exactly. They
Yeah.
might be overworked. They might have stuff going on in their personal life.
Yeah.
Like it's something that seems like, oh, this is just so black and white, like follow the process or don't. But when you dive into why someone deviates from their past behavior, it opens up like a whole world of possibilities as what might be the issue, and something that you might need to address with them.
Are these three skills a two-way road? So if we talk about their software engineers, individual contributors, kind of communication, empathy, and the trend analysis, would be this the same skills for software engineers, or should they have different soft skills, right? We are focusing on soft
Sure.
skills for ICs.
That's a really good question. I think that it's more important for managers to be able, the language one is less important for an IC. It's more important for a manager because they're setting the example for the team. It's more important for them to be using the right types of language. I would say that empathy is a huge one, regardless of your role in an organization. For sure, you have to be, as an IC, empathetic of your teammates, of your boss, for sure, of people that are reviewing your code, stakeholders that are submitting your requests. And you also should be empathetic towards your future self. So like that means writing code that's not indecipherable, or like updating a README that is outdated, or that significantly changes because you recognize that like, oh, future Ben is going to be pissed off if he comes back to this and doesn't understand what current Ben did. So empathy is huge. And then trend analysis, I would say, is also important for sure. And that could be even on a larger scale of like industry trends, keeping track of or keeping an eye on like new technologies, new styles of work, even either in like actual process or in like system design or actual code. So that's huge. And then also kind of pairing with empathy, like if you are, as an IC, observing a type of behavior in your teammates or even in yourself, and you like recognize that maybe it's not producing, it's hampering their work, or
Hmm.
causing them to get blocked more often than they need to be. That's something that is a good form of like behavior analysis and trend analysis to
No, yeah.
have us.
Makes sense. But so their last point is kind of depends on their direction where you're looking. So as a manager, you're looking on the team,
Mm-hmm.
and as an IC, you're looking on the market outside of the team. You can also look on the team, kind of how your colleagues are performing, what are they doing, in the sense not to look on the metrics, but kind of looking on their kind of work that they're doing so that you can share the knowledge.
Mhm.
For instance, your colleague is working on their component or feature A, you're working on feature B, and you're kind of seeing that this person is skilled and doing one type of job, and you can also always connect with that person to get the experience and share the experience. So just kind of looking around and understanding what's happening around.
Yeah. And I think that just one more thing on that. I think
Yeah, sure.
ICs often have might be like the first person to notice that kind of change in behavior of their teammates. Like take the commit messages example again. Like if someone gets tagged on to review a PR, like they might be the first one to see that change. And they also might be, because there might be less of a hierarchy on the dev team than there would be from manager to developer of the team. They might have an interesting position to be able to go to that person and be like, hey, is everything okay? Like, you usually are more verbose than this, or you usually have more personality in your messaging. Like, do you feel overwhelmed? Like they might be able to surface that issue in a way that a manager might have to be more delicate about with that, so that they don't make it seem like the person's in trouble.
Yeah. That's empathy in action, actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
As you mentioned, 3 top skills for EM for you. I'm curious how you see them in practice within your company, within your daily work.
Mm-hmm.
So you're working in a quite small company compared to big tech giants. It's a software development company, and I have been amazed. I was amazed when I saw like best workplace for several times. Let's decompose it. So let's first talk about you and their kind of how your day look like, how your week look like, any special hints or procedures or ceremonies that you're running to follow their style of management that you are driving to the company.
I guess I'll take your last question first. I think, when I said about like having empathy be systemic in your organization, that comes from like a C-suite or a management level, because they're often the ones that are really solidifying processes on your team. So for me, the way that shows up on our team is the way that we structure meetings and our sort of internal communication. One-on-ones, like I said, I hold them regularly. They're standing. They're on everyone's calendar every other week. My team knows that they have the ability to call a one-on-one if they want for some other reason that's not on that schedule. And then I also start every meeting by asking the dev, is there something that you want to talk about? So like making it on them, putting their interests and their concerns and experiences first is huge. And then if there's anything that I need to talk about, that comes later. Same with our like all hands engineering team meeting. We start that by having a mandatory kudos section. Mm-hmm. So, not everyone has to share something, but generally the ball gets rolling and everybody does. And that's literally just like name 1 or 2 things that you witnessed somebody else do that you thought was great, or that, something that it often turns into something that someone else did that helped me, like thank you to this person because, they did all of this work and that got me unblocked on my task or something. So reinforcing that empathy, or I guess enforcing that empathy by having these kind of cheesy but mandatory sessions in meetings.
That's a very nice technique, actually, because you provide people space to connect directly within the crowd, within the team, and also before their next meeting, when they go in this meeting, they have to recall what has been nice, right? And bring that positive emotion into their life once again, because positive emotions are kind of dying a little bit, and there you obviously remember more negative emotions typically. And then also like, okay, I have to think about small things that somebody helped me, and that kind of enforces the positive attitude. Very nice.
Yeah. It's also, so we're a completely distributed team. We are a remote company first. And it really helps battle isolation and people's feeling of like just working in a void. I think that's very common, especially nowadays on remote teams, especially for devs that might be more heads down and less involved. Like they might not have any standard pairing sessions or might have infrequent one-on-ones with their managers. Those types of ceremonies, they can seem annoying at times or like, why are we doing this? But overall, they generally help the team stay connected and feel connected when there might not be any other reason for any of our devs to actually see each other face to face and talk about each other's work.
Yeah, nice. So with the communication, so with the language that you mentioned, how do you bring that to life?
So that one's trickier for sure, because you don't want to police someone's language, but you also don't. You want to encourage, and it's not even like, oh, you should be speaking in this way over that way. It's more of like, here's how it all comes back to the empathy point and connection. Here's how to say what you're saying in a way that doesn't immediately put the other person on the defensive or ostracize them in some way. So one, you have to try and set an example. That's probably the biggest one as a manager, by being careful with the language that you're using. We have a small part of our handbook, our engineering handbook, but meaningful part that is sort of like language standards at Planet Argonne. A small but meaningful example is like whenever we acquire a new client or inherit a new repo to work on, like switching from master to main as the main branch. That's one example of ways you can standardize language in your company to try and make it feel more, inclusive or less
harsh. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And other ways is just like I said, like the way that you structure a meeting. You can prompt people with ways to talk in that meeting without directly saying, here's how you need to talk. For instance, if we're giving feedback in a meeting, we're all, everyone's encouraged to use nouns instead of verbs, and to point at like observable behavior versus like judgments that they're making. So instead of saying, this is like, you messed up on this, or like you did a bad job in that PR. It's more like, I observed that this code is not like optimized in the way that we want it to be, or doesn't meet the requirements of the ticket. That's nice. Can be harsh to hear. It doesn't necessarily take away any bad feelings out of it, like entirely out of a back and forth. But it does make it seem less judgy and less about the person as a person and more about this specific work that they've put on.
It switches the focus, right? From focusing on the person to focusing on their issue or on the thing, as I said, on the noun, right? So I'm not saying about you or anybody else, but I'm saying about the result that we achieved or that we haven't achieved.
Exactly.
When this all in place, it's very nice thing that you're saying. Is it one of the ways to attract talents to the company where you're working? Like, does it help?
I think so. I mean, it certainly couldn't hurt, I hope. I think that, so there's different, stages of like talent acquisition. The first one being just like getting people to apply or be interested in your job. I would say where all of this helps is the middle phase, which is probably the more like interview, the person making up their mind about whether they would accept an offer by the interactions that they've had with you and your company. So, I'm sure everyone's had this experience, and if not, you're very lucky. But when you go to an interview and you were really excited about the job, and then you get into an interview and maybe you talk to like 2 or 3 people, or it's a group interview or something, and everyone there just seems like they are just dead inside. And you're just like, oh, maybe this is not the golden opportunity that I thought it was. So when you have a team that is generally pretty healthy and has a positive outlook about their work, like that's going to show in those interactions you have with potential new team members, and they're probably going to be more excited to join because they see that people communicate well and they talk, and it might not be all rosy. Like there might be bad things that are discussed or like challenges that are discussed in an interview, but overall it seems like a healthy culture to be joining. In terms of like having it be an attraction point, that's a little bit harder. You know, you mentioned like the Inc. magazine, like one of the best places to work, like Planet Argonne, our team has voted that multiple year over year now, which is great. Thank you, team. That can help, but that can also be like, well, how many other companies have that? You know, like who's to say? It certainly doesn't hurt, but like I said, that could be something that is just a little like a sort of a marketing point. I would say that the best way to do it is to have your managers, your CEOs, even your C-suite, and your team members involved in the community, even when there's no need. You don't have a need on your team for more resources. So that can be, you know, like hosting internships. That can be being active on like dev spaces online, like, you know, X or LinkedIn or you know, like Slack channels. It can mean going to meetups, attending conferences, like just having people out and about, talking about their work and seemingly excited and happy about their work can be just a very organic way to attract talent to your company, because, you know, one, it shows that people are relatively happy working there. And two, it also shows that like your company has standardized, makes room for your team members to go do that sort of thing.
Well, Ben, it's in the end, it all sums up, right? All the different parts, they add to their people happiness in the company, and their people willing to work within the company, because well, the company has to take care to create a space for the person to work, but in the end their company exists for business purposes and not for making you or me happy on the workplace. We just every person looks for his or her own goal, and the company is also looking for the goal to well, make money, right? And they're have happy and long relationship with the customer, so that everyone can profit. One thing that might be also a good for the company's profiles is their diversion and their inclusion, that are important to bring everyone to the table and allow everyone at the table to talk freely and have equal opportunities. You, as being an open queer, if I said that correctly, or what it is for you? How do you achieve? How do you advocate for the representation in tech?
Well, first, I just want to like acknowledge, currently in tech, like being an openly gay white cis man is like one of the least challenging parts of being in the queer community. So there are many more identities that are much, you know, might not feel as, you know, might feel a little more out of place in the traditional tech community than I do, just because I'm gay. So that being said, like I do think that there, you know, I remember working for a company a number of years ago, and we were hiring a new developer, and they really wanted a woman on the team. And there was very few applicants, and the one applicant that they did talk to lived in Hawaii, and like they wanted to relocate, and they wanted a relocation, you know, bonus and all this stuff, and like they didn't end up hiring her for a number of those reasons. And I'm laughing awkwardly, not because it's funny, but just because it's so like, well, obviously that was the culture back then, and like investing in like making your team diverse was just not a thing. And so I bring that point up because there was conversation around that where it was a pipeline problem, right? Like, oh, there's just no women in the pipeline. There's no non-white people in the pipeline. And it's like, well, guess what, guys? You built the pipeline. So you are the source of the applicants. Like, don't act like this is some sort of thing where your hands are tied and you have no control over the people that are applying to your company. If you don't want the same type of people applying to your jobs, like, don't put your jobs in front of the same type of people that have been applying. Like, you have to actively go find communities and engage with them. Like I said, not just so that you can get an applicant, but so that you are supporting their community and building relationships even when there are no open roles. So that can be, like I said, like engaging in communities online, going to meetups, just trying to be an ally in ways that are non-reciprocal. And then the second part of that story is like, oh, it's going to cost money for us to hire this person. Whereas if we just hire this other person, like, then that's not going to cost us that much money. It's like, well, I guess when it comes down to it, like, diversity, like DEI didn't mean that much to you, right? Like, don't say that it does, but if it's going to cost you money, it's not going to. Like, you might need to spend a little more money. Like, this is maybe not the most relevant point now because everything's remote. She probably wouldn't have had to move from Hawaii, but like, there's still that sort of vibe where it's like, oh, well, of course we want like a very diverse team and we would love to have that, but it's going to like slow down our hiring process and we might have to like spend some money to go after certain audiences. And it's like, well, all right, well, that's your choice, I suppose. So like, you can you can make that as you will, but if you do, then you might want to reevaluate your commitment to those efforts.
Yeah, you have to, your actions have to correspond with what you declare, right? Otherwise, it's basically, okay, just declaration that you're put as a vision of the company, but never made it into their strategy and their tactics, right?
I also want to point out, and this is something that I like learned from other very insightful people that are not me, that are like active in the DEI space, but like, recruitment is just like step one in having like a diverse team. You also have to be building a team that reinforces psychological safety for everyone involved. And that can be often actually much harder even than finding applicants. So, you might do a good job of like attracting people that are not the traditional like cis white male into your tech team. But if your team is still structured to cater only to that cis white male developer, then you're going to probably have higher attrition amongst the non-cis white male developers on your team.
True. You mentioned the psychological safety, and that's actually very important for any team member, so that people feel welcomed and that they don't have to think about their connectivity with people in the sense like, oh, well, I don't want to talk with that person, but rather I want to look at that person as a professional, right? Mm-hmm. I want to connect with that person to work together and kind of shift the focus and make sure that people are safe and they're focusing on their work that you're doing and they're not the preference of or the person identification, right? That's also very important. And it's interesting how different companies work in this space, and they're like international companies are trying to bring this up. However, like local companies might struggle somewhat. I wouldn't say the US is quite in front of, like, I would say single nation companies. I would say possibly in Ukraine, not everybody is putting a stress on this.
Right.
Because it's not on their agenda these days. But it might be on the agenda. It's important to understand this and to bring this to the table.
Right. And I think that, like I mentioned when we were talking about recruiting, like expanding where you are, the different communities and organizations and groups that you are talking to and getting involved in just by being there can be just like a soft DEI effort. Like, it doesn't have to be an initiative. You see a lot of these companies that, like, especially after like 2020, the summer of 2020, we're like, oh, we are all in on DEI. We're going to hire a bunch of people. And then, that lasted like a year or two. And now they're like, oh, first things on the chopping block. And that's sad. It's not surprising, at least to me. But it's also doesn't have to be like, I always felt those were insincere or missing the mark in some way, because it's like, that should just be in your company. Like that should be part of your processes. And why, like, if you have to be like, hey, we need a whole department to figure out how to be inclusive, like, well, that is saying a lot about your internal processes and standards regardless. So like, I think, to your point of like, oh, I'm in a small country and working in a small company, this is not high priority. I don't think that's necessarily like a terrible thing to admit, but it also is something that can just be like slowly integrated into your recruitment, or even just your culture as a company, by like being like, hey, we're not going to like only interact and exist in these like straight white male spaces.
Yeah. No, that's indeed, and it's also important to, well, from what you're saying, and I here agree, it's more important to put inclusion, diversity as part of the company rather than the focus. So before putting the focus, make sure that you are willing and you are able to change the company inside internally. Because if you are setting the focus first, but you haven't done any homework, then the focus will be lost and will be very blurred, right?
Exactly. And it's setting up your team for success. Let's say like you do get your first non-white developer on your team. That should not be the time you're like, oh, we need to start thinking about like how we talk in meetings or something, like that's a lot harder to like, and also kind of insulting. Be like, oh, we have a brown person on the team. Let's stop using slurs. I don't know. Like, it's just, that's an extreme example, but like,
right.
Like you should have that institutionalized anyways, so that someone comes in, feels comfortable right off the bat, versus like, all right, now it's your responsibility to show us what you need to feel comfortable. And it's like, nobody wants that regardless of identity.
True. And it's actually the first thing about the language that you said. So you have to make sure that their community, the team, is not doing any, sexism, is not doing any racism, nothing. It's just their healthy environment.
Right.
That's prepared to accept any person who is meeting their developer standards. That's it. And who is helping the company to achieve their goals in terms of bringing money. That's the main purpose of preparing for any DOI to be included in your strategy, if this doesn't exist yet.
True.
That's interesting, and I didn't thought that we will talk that much about this direction, but it's good that we brought it up and discuss it from various points of view. When talking about their developer experience, and let's put this as another topic that we had, you said that you improve processes. You also mentioned about measuring and the trends as a manager that you have to make sure to, but you said like, okay, it's a developer experience, but it's not only about metrics and numbers. How to balance this, kind of measuring every commit, every estimate that your team is giving, and also keeping the environment positive and they're kind of open for everyone to work, and not being scared of giving their estimate and working on some issues. So how do you tackle this?
Sure. First, I would say that it's really important to like divorce the ideas of developer experience and developer productivity. They are linked for sure. And some might say they are, dependent upon each other. They are two different ways to view like a developer's time at your company. I think that many people track productivity metrics as developer experience metrics, and I don't. Many people, that might be an exaggeration, but it can happen for sure. And so when we're talking about developer experience, that is more of a way to judge how do the processes that we have in place like support the work that's being done. How easily do people find it is to like set up an app to push to production. Like how are these pipelines? How well structured are like pairing schedules or one-on-ones? How free do people feel to come to their PM, their product owner, their manager themselves, and suggest a new idea for the company or raise a concern about something that's happening in the company. So these are all sort of different measurements of different parts of a developer experience. And they can be standardized for sure. Like we use tools that send out surveys every 3 months, so quarterly surveys. They are prompted via Slack. They just take place in a browser window, and so they're super low barrier, and they're consistently done, so everyone knows when they're coming. That alone isn't enough, though, because oftentimes there's been plenty of studies on like survey participation and like how bought in people are to this type of work. And it only works if you then like use that data for something. So going back to trends, we use the data that we get from our results to both like shape the work that's going to be done internally for the development team in the next quarter, as well as to have things to talk about in engineering team meetings. So if we have, a survey that's closed on a Friday and we have a all hands meeting on Tuesday, like I'll probably gather the results from that survey and we will discuss any concerning trends or anything that's improved. So it's like, hey, PR review time, the sentiment around PRs seemed to go up. Like, what changed recently that caused that to go up? Like, why is everyone reporting that to be better? And likewise, like, I don't know, like app setup or something. Like, did we get a new client and they have a really difficult application that with a lot of different moving parts and a lot of different dependencies that we have to like get set up on different machines? Like, did that drive down sentiment scores on something? So it's the follow-up is really important, and then also the use of that data to plan future work. Like, is there something in that PR sentiment increase that we can extract and apply to different areas to make that scores go up elsewhere? Now, when it comes to productivity, like I'm a firm believer that like the more happy a developer team is, like the better work they're going to be doing. So those are very much linked. But it's also important to have like hard metrics around productivity, specifically, I think, for the purpose of like showing areas for improvement and also highlighting areas for praise. So, if you're going into a performance review, and I've definitely done this myself as the manager, not super excited or happy to report, but I've gone in with like little data to back me up and more just like anecdotal data or peer review feedbacks, which is all very important, but it's not something that I can point to and be like, hey, over the past 6 months, like this seems to have slipped for you. Like, is there thing that we can address to help get you back up to where we want you to be? Like, or like you're training a lot of code that doesn't have any test coverage applied to it. Like, why is that? And how can we make a plan for improvement? Or likewise, we can say like, hey, you're just killing it on including tests in the code that you're writing. Like, that's something to be celebrated. So data can be used. Data is only data. Data is data. Like it is what it is. It's how you use it and how you follow up on it. And like the way that you examine the cause and the reason behind that data. That's really important.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear, and it's nice that you're using their data. It's really nice, and do you mentioned PRs? Do you use any productivity metrics in between reviews? So not PRs, reviews. Do you use any productivity metrics between reviews, like on a weekly basis, or I don't know, daily basis possibly is a bit exaggerated, but kind of a weekly, monthly basis.
Yeah. So when I first came on, I focused more on developer experience. I was hired, like I said, in 2020, which I don't know if you remember, it was kind of a tough year for the whole world.
I do.
Yeah. So my main focus when I came on to Planet Argonne was morale improvement and in developer experience, and making sure that people felt safe and felt happy and productive in their work. Since then, we focused more on developer productivity, and specifically for the reasons of identifying areas of success for celebration as well as areas for improvement. Of course, this all ties. We have many clients, and though the productivity metrics can highlight areas where we've been doing really well for our clients, as well as also areas that we can improve for our clients. But as a manager, I focus my work with this mostly on how it affects the team. So I would say that don't right now have any standing metrics review as it applies to the team as a whole. What I do use is some sort of comparative analysis between data points to see if there is any behavior among certain team members or certain projects that needs to be addressed. So for instance, well, this is a good example. So we are an agency. I don't know if I mentioned that at the top, but we are an agency. We're not a product company. So we have lots of different types of clients, lots of different applications, and team members work on 2 to 3 different client applications at any one time over a month. And so part of the challenge that we have as a company, and specifically with our PM with resourcing, is how do we
So basically, Ben, you were talking about their productivity metrics, and you mentioned that you are working in a software development company where you have developers working on several different projects within the month. Do you apply any productivity metrics? Does it make sense to apply them in that environment, and what kind of metrics?
Sure. Yeah. So we are an agency, and we have multiple clients and multiple projects that we work on over time. Developers are resourced to different projects throughout the month. It can be kind of challenging to use productivity metrics in a very standardized way across the entire team, because devs are working in multiple repos, multiple applications, and oftentimes those repos are in different places. So we have, our Planet Argonne GitHub org, and I would say the majority of our clients' repos are there. Some of them are not. Some of them are in their own organizations. Some of them have very strict lockdown on those orgs, like who can access it and the different permissions those people have. So gathering data to apply team-wide is definitely more challenging for productivity metrics than it is for developer experience metrics. That being said, there are certain things that we can look for in our data that we do have that are more like comparative analysis between different data points within the productivity metrics. And that can help us in better serving our clients. So for instance, we have our resourcing goal is to, if someone is working on a project, but they aren't resourced full time to a project for that month, we try to keep them working more or less the same amount of hours on that project every week. Now, using productivity metrics, we can then pull data in terms of PR and other things that we have data points on to see if if that style of resourcing, meaning working 5 to 10 hours a week on a certain project, is actually slowing down productivity for that project. We've actually used this on a couple of projects where we're PR speed and productivity velocity is kind of low on this project. Could it be that the devs that are working on it are feeling like they're spending too much time getting ramped up back up because they don't have enough time to be in deep work on that project because they only have like 10 hours a week on it. So instead of having 4 10-hour periods over the course of an entire month, week over week, we changed to let's try 2 weeks, 20 hours each week. Maybe that's the first 2 weeks of the month, and then we take 2 weeks off that project, or it's the first and third every other week. And then that has sped up velocity some on these projects because the team can dedicate more of their energy and dive deeper into the work when they have a larger chunk of time to work on it.
Makes sense what you're saying. And Ben, actually, thank you very much for all your insight for this conversation. It was very interesting to hear about your view on the 3 top skills for EMs from your point of view, to talk a little bit how you set their developer experience, and specifically thank you about the DEI part. That's not something that I really talk a lot about, but I'm grateful that we could talk about it, and I'm happy to have you on this podcast to talk about it. If people want to reach out to you, where should they go? Where can they find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Ben Parisot. I live in Portland and I work at Planet Argonne, so those are 2 ways to find me. You can email me at ben@planetargonne.com. And that's about it. I'm not really on social media anywhere else, but happy to connect on either of those two ways.
Yeah. So thank you very much, and it has been a great conversation.
Thank you. I enjoyed speaking with you.